Here we go. Today's learning goal. We're going to present a step-by-step process on how to set up and introduce the circle, how to use guidelines to ensure a safe process, developing appropriate and intentional guiding questions and prompts for your unique students, and finally, how to close your circle with care. So here we go. We're going to dive in right now. Get ready. If you haven't already gotten your pencil and your pen, your notes, now would be a good time to do it. Here are the how-to steps for connection circles in your classroom. I'll go through and explain each step, and when it feels needed, I'll go ahead and model what it sounds like for you to go over with your class. So, step 1 in your connection circles, setting up the space. Arrangement of your classroom is super important, as I'm sure you know when you're doing your seating arrangements in class. The power of intentional design is pretty strong here. You're going to want to arrange your classroom and the actual circle. So you may have a space where you can do that in your class. You may have to actually set that up and put some more intentional design into that. It could be either on the floor or in chairs. I know that with sort of more mature students, when you're going into middle school and high school, they prefer to be in chairs, as you see in the picture here. These are elementary school students, and they are totally good with crisscross applesauce. So, as I mentioned before, I know that desks sometimes can be prohibitive and tough to move, but you're going to want to create a space maybe outside of your normal seating or desk area and create just chairs. If you have those kind of chair and desk combos, you may want to just find a way you can set it up without the chair and desk combo kind of on the side, because having the desk in front of you could really impede some of your body language in the circle. So it's important to also create a space that's different from our usual way of discussing things in the class. It's not often that we're given the opportunity to see each other eye to eye or to even notice each other's body language. So being in that circle configuration, away from the way we do our day-to-day business, helps really maintain the sacred nature of the circle and also let the kids know that we're about to get deep. It's important for everyone to be on the same level. So whether everybody's in chairs or everybody's on the floor, everybody, including you, teacher, on the same level. I went into a classroom once, second grade classroom, and the kids were all sitting on the floor, and the teacher was in her big, comfy teacher chair, and it just felt like a big power dynamic difference there. So you really want to be on the same level as everyone, just to, maintain that equity. Now, I want you to think about your seating arrangement. Think about how you group your students for group work or for optimal productivity, and keep that in mind when setting up your circle. While, assigned seats aren't by any means necessary, I found it helps in certain situations with certain students if they're distracted by each other in close proximity, or even conversely, if some students benefit from the comfort of certain students' proximity, especially if you have some English language learners in your classroom, that can really be helpful. So there you go, seating arrangement. Now, the centerpiece isn't something that's totally necessary. I use a centerpiece with all of my circles. It just really helps for me personally set the tone and the space. And it also signifies that it's a special time. It creates also a focal point that can become a nonverbal way of calling attention that it's circle time. So envision this, your classroom is set up in a circle. Maybe your students are trickling in from recess, and you're slowly putting together the elements of your centerpiece. It's a great nonverbal way to show that this is where attention is going to be flowing next. You can obviously do a circle without a centerpiece, so don't worry if you don't have one in mind to get sorted out in the beginning. Keep in mind that you can also get your class involved by creating their own centerpiece. It's just a really great way, like show and tell them a little bit more about themselves. If you look at the centerpiece here, I think that's a picture of Nelson Mandela, some flowers. Yeah, don't worry too much about this. If you wanted to, you could snoop around on Pinterest. It's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but you can probably get some good ideas there. So next, part of step 1 is your circle introduction. Sorry, I got a dog. If you heard that dog barking, I apologize. Your circle introduction. You're going to want to give a background of the circles, sort of the history of how they came to be and the purpose of why we do them. So the students will notice that the room will be set up differently. They're naturally going to have some questions, especially if this is something that they've never done before. If you don't address the questions and the curiosities before you dive into doing a circle, you might find that these questions are going to come up during the circle and probably disrupt the process. So some baseline information you can cover in your intro is obviously the history. You can mention that circles are a sacred process that have been used throughout time by indigenous cultures, all the way from New Zealand to Canada. It's actually used in New Zealand as the first response to any juvenile criminal offense. The purpose is something you're going to want to go over. So you can ask students what they notice about the shape of a circle and use those observations to draw out the points of why we're in the circle formation. So you might hear something like, we sit in the circle so that we all can be seen and heard. Or a circle shape allows for all of us to see each other, kind of like when I sit in a circle at the dinner table, or when I sit around a campfire. We sit in a circle to get support from each other. A circle is everlasting. So these are some examples of like really laying out how circles got started and the purpose of why. If you notice to the left, I included a photo example of circles used in a Native American, the Sioux tribe. So you can pull up some visual examples as well to help support the visual learning behind the circle introduction. Another thing is kind of giving the background. If you notice here, you see this photo. This is also an image from a tribe, actually in Africa. And it's an image that I pulled from a lesson that I did on circles. This lesson that I did was giving the background on circles. And it was unbelievable. What the feedback was just from that lesson, it really sparked and activated their interests and curiosities. So I had the opportunity to roll this lesson plan out school-wide at my middle school. I've done this lesson plan with a lot of different age groups, a lot of different classrooms, and a lot of different schools. And with my middle school, of the 600 students that had access to this lesson, nearly half of them requested to play the game that is associated with this image. So these kids from the African tribe, it's called the Obeyi game, and it was part of the lesson, and the kids were begging me to dive deeper into this. So lesson plans can also help you give a little introduction to your kids before diving into the actual circle process. So that is really step 1, just really giving that background behind the circles and the why. And also setting up your classroom and the arrangement to really prepare for the circle process. Any questions? Right now I know that was quite a bit for step 1, but if there's any questions, I'd like to open it up to you guys now to also just kind of check in, see how you guys are doing. But yeah, any questions about how to set up or introduce? Let's see. Oh, not a question, but we have someone here that said they like the centerpiece idea. Great. Okay, awesome. More comments here, not necessarily questions, so we're going to move right along. Thank you guys. That is step one. And again, don't worry, we'll have cliff notes towards the end in case you were worried about taking notes in that last step one. Now we're moving on to step numero dos, the guidelines. Man, guidelines are really, really important. You're going to want to set up guidelines in your classroom, mostly for safety. It's really important that we establish a safe place for our kids to be willing to share. You have to have guidelines, absolutely non-negotiable, because it's a way that everyone can agree on how to behave and treat each other while they're in circle. Ideally, you'll create these with your class, but I know you've got tons to cover as it is, so here's a little ninja move. You can use our guidelines and do a whip around strategy to get buy-in quickly. And as you'll see here, this is a guideline poster that I made for my very first round of connection circles. I find it really beneficial to have a visual support to just support not only the students, but quite honestly to support myself when I'm getting started with connection circles. Pardon me, I'm going to take a sip of water. Thank you. All right, so you notice my circle guideline poster starts off with respect. Respect is so critical. If you want to introduce the guidelines, I'll give you a little introduction of how to do that. I'm going to model it for you right now. So, good morning, class. I'm so excited to do our first circle together. It's important that we have some expectations so that we all agree to our guidelines in order to make sure that our circle is safe. So, number one is respect. Please be sure to listen and speak with respect. Using the talking piece, only speak your truth. One mic, guys. Number two, the all-powerful talking stick. If you don't got it, zip it. We really want to, again, remember respect in our talking piece is our way to do that. You're going to want to make sure that you listen with your heart and mind and use I statements. I've put some sentence stems up on the board to help you with the I statements. An I statement is when you use the sentence, I feel blank when blank. So you're going to want to use these sorts of language when we're talking in our circle. Another thing is we're going to make sure that we share our time fairly so that everyone has the chance to speak. If you're not feeling it, don't worry. You can pass the stick and we'll be sure to come back to you. It's always okay to pass. And finally, what is said here, what is heard here, let it stay here. We want to make sure that everyone feels safe and that we practice confidentiality. Again, okay, I'll say that's a cut. That might be one way how you could introduce sort of the guidelines in your classroom. Now, again, I want to emphasize that it's okay for your students to pass. You want to make sure that they feel safe, and you give them the opportunity to get back. Be sure to always get back to the students that pass. The talking piece. Now, the talking piece is one of the most critical items and tools that you're going to use in your connection circle. I've seen some circles not use talking pieces, and as you sort of get more and more versed with the connection circles, you may find that you don't need it. I have found that when you start to lose the talking piece, it diminishes some of the power of equal voice in your circles. So I encourage maintaining it. You're going to want to introduce the talking piece to your class, discuss its significance, or even create an original one with your class. I've seen students and teachers alike use objects that mean a lot to them, maybe heirlooms. I've seen them use keepsakes, mementos, quartz crystals, or even just a stick, to tell you the truth. Um, you may want to consider the fact that some talking pieces are not appropriate, like a balloon makes a lot of noise. Um, let's see, things that can look like certain human body parts could also be a dangerous zone because, kids can be silly. A rain stick, anything that produces a lot of noise may be disruptive. Talking pieces are used to really regulate the dialogue of participants, and you want to make sure that the talking pieces pass from one person to the next around the circle. Only the person holding the talking piece may speak. That includes you, teacher. And be sure to, if you do feel the need to interject, be sure to request the talking piece so that you're being held accountable with that guideline as well as your students. It brings about a fair process and a balance of power, and it allows the holder of the piece to speak without interruption and allows the listeners to really focus on listening and not be distracted about a response to the speaker. The use of the talking piece totally allows for full expression of emotions and thoughtful reflections. So here's what it might sound like when you're introducing the talking piece. Hi class, today I brought in a really special piece of rose quartz crystal that a friend gave to me, and I decided to use this today as our talking piece because it was given to me at a really special time in my life, and I just always feel that when I'm having a hard time or when I'm needing a little extra love, I hold on to this piece of quartz crystal and it makes me feel better. So I just thought I would bring it in. It would be a great piece to use today. And I just think it would be really wonderful for us to respect this piece because it means a lot to me. And I want to remind you what the talking piece is used for in our circle. It's to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to listen as well as speak. So if you're not holding on to the crystal, my hope is that you are using your active listening and you're not thinking about what you're going to say when the crystal comes to you. But just as the crystal absorbs energy, I want you to absorb the words that are coming out of the speaker's mouth. All right? And also for the speaker, if you're feeling a little nervous as you're speaking, just keep in mind that we got you, and this special talking piece actually has some really special healing powers. So when you're holding it and you're speaking, just really try and feel that we're all here to support each other and to make sure that everyone feels safe. And cut. That would be what it sounds like when you're introducing the talking piece. Obviously not verbatim, but those are some things that you can mention. Introduce the piece, discuss its significance, and really go over why the piece is used. All right, talking piece. Now that, we've gone over that, I thought maybe I would give you, since we're pretty good on time, a few, bonus gold tips. You'll notice that a lot of students get excited during circles, which is amazing. But some of that elation and excitement can disrupt the flow of the circle. So when I introduce the talking piece, I also remind my students that being excited, or even maybe the opposite of excited, being bummed out by something, those are big emotions and often hard to hold without making noise or using our voice. So I use silent signals. Silent signals of support are a great way to kind of harness those emotions and that excitement without being disruptive to the circle. So a thumbs up, anything like jazz fingers, Anything like that could be a good little gold tip for you. So now that we've gone over that, and now I'm kind of going over time, here we go. Step 3, your circle prompts. Just as you scaffold and differentiate your instruction and present intentional, essential questions for your lessons, you're going to want to harness the same approach with your circles. Careful design of your questions is important to facilitate a discussion that goes beyond just surface responses. So keep in mind too that you want to go deep, but not too deep. We want to be sure everyone feels safe. So prompts should be tiered according to the intention of the circle. So for example, if you're trying to build a relationship, trying to build community, just getting acquainted, there are different kind of questions you can ask for your different intentions. You want to really avoid yes or no questions because that's really just going to get not really deep or build relationship. Like, how is everyone feeling today? Good? That might be a tough question. Or did everyone have a good winter break? Yes or no? That isn't really going to get to the deep relationships that you want to get to. You also want to remain strength and asset focused. So if you're tackling a little deeper level question, you're not going to want to say, what is the hardest thing you've ever been through in your life? Because that's going to be kind of a Debbie Downer moment. Instead, a kind of strength or asset focused way to pose a question would be, how did you get through a hard time in your life? So focusing on the strength of how you got through the hard time as opposed to just the pain of that hard time itself. So with these circle prompts, in your first circle, I recommend doing a value round first because that's going to really help you build trust and relationship, which will also be able to feed into your guidelines. Values are a little different from guidelines. Guidelines are sort of non-negotiables. Values are what is important to you. So for your first circle prompt, I would recommend saying or asking, what is something that you value? Or what is something that you really need to feel safe? And then you have a way of kind of charting all of that. You write it all down like, I need to feel respect. I need to be able to know that what I say here isn't going to be gossiped about. So you write all of those down, and at the end of your first circle prompt, you have already a list of values that can serve as an agreement that the whole class can make in order to maintain and be held accountable to holding a safe space for all of the students involved. So that's just a little tip on your first circle prompt, and you can probably get pretty creative with certain prompts. I just want to encourage you not to isolate students in your prompt or kind of call individual students out in your prompt, like, how did Timmy's behavior make us feel? That is really dangerous territory, and don't want to make any students feel the heat of the shame game. So really just focus on building relationship, especially when you first get started. Now, finally, step 4 is the closing. Just with a beautiful story, which I'm sure as teachers, we are all familiar with the structure of story. You have your beginning, your arc, your middle, and finally, your closing, your end. So just as with any beautiful story, your circle will need a conclusion. This is how you're going to acknowledge all of the participants in your circle for the good work that they've done and give them the props that they deserve as well as them the opportunity to share all of those props and give sort of accolades or appreciations for them to also share reflections and maybe even feedback on how the circle went. Closing activities allow for all of the participants to reflect on the circle and, you know, just tie up all the loose ends. If it was an emotional circle, it kind of allows for that closure so that the learning can be kicked into high gear immediately after the circle. Um, as you see here, the smooth transition, I've seen some circles end without a closing, and the transition into learning was sort of disruptive and a little jarring. So I know as teachers, our learning time is extremely valuable. So just as you go from one subject matter or one lesson to the next, uh, smooth transitions are super important. So keep that in mind. Something, an activity you may do is just go do an appreciation round at the end of the circle. What is one thing or somebody that you appreciate after today's circle? Or that was an amazing circle, guys. Thank you so much for the courage that you brought, and the energy and focus you brought. The respect was unbelievable today. Um, but we're not just doing this to be okay or good. We want to be extraordinary and great. So, what is one way we can make our circle better next time? That is a real good way to end the circle. So, finally, in case you were wondering,